I solemnly swear that I am up to no good.
Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, and we're here. This is the final one. This is our final review in Harry Potter month. Today we'll be doing our review on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. We've come a long way, all the way from Philosopher's Stone up until this point. We've had very, very long discussions on them, all over an hour each, I think. But this is the final one. This is the one we've all been waiting to talk about, because this is the one probably with the most interesting stuff in terms of character. Definitely the most action-packed one, and with the stuff with the most going on. So, once again, Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows Part 2, directed by David Yates, based on the book by J.K. Rowling, starring all of the same people we remembered from last time, and this is the big one. So, as always, this is going to be an incredibly spoiler-filled review. General sit-down discussion, informal chat about this movie, the Harry Potter scenes in general, and probably many, many mentions of the book from you, George. So we always kick off with memories on this one, and this being the final part that came out in 2011. The memories are still very fresh on this one. I still remember the opening day very, very well on this one. So, George, memories on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2.
I can remember being very frustrated that I didn't get to see this film at midnight, because I was on the classic Year 10 work experience, and I said to them, I really want to go, but I can't turn up to your work after being at midnight, especially at the age of, I think I was 14. I turned 15 a few days before. I come out a week after my birthday. So, yeah, one of my birthday presents was a month early, which was booking our tickets. I still have my Harry Potter 3D, Real D 3D glasses, which nice. I still take to the cinema sometimes because everyone else is the same. And I just remember being so hyped. I was watching one of the films a day in the build-up to it. I was on one of them proper Potter hypes. I didn't bother rereading the book because I didn't really read books back then. Obviously, I have done recently, so it's been very different. But I was just excited, and unlike part one, I wasn't going to spoil it for everyone on Facebook. Although one of my biggest memories is the weekend this film came out. Essentially, everyone I knew in the world saw this film. It'll probably be the same with you, but all I can remember was the Facebook pages that just blew up out of nowhere, like taking out a Horcrux in a jumper because you're Neville fucking Longbottom. There was just sort of Facebook page memes everywhere. It was an incredible few days.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you talked about the opening day. This film broke all kinds of records when it came out. And reading off Wikipedia now that Harry Potter Deathly Hallows Part 2 claimed the worldwide opening weekend record with $483.2 million, which is insane. I think you said it was outdone by the Avengers the following year, though, right?
And then everything got outdone by Star Wars.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it was to be expected, to be honest, because we both know Harry Potter, absolute worldwide phenomenon with the books and, of course, the movies. And this was the final one. This was the culmination of everything that had come before. So I was 18 when this movie came out. I was in the final year of sixth form. I talked about sort of with Harry Potter Deathly Hallows Part 1 how that got me back into the series. Everyone was talking about it at my school, how it was the end of an era, everyone was getting back to it, so I never had any convincing that I needed to go to this movie. I was absolutely invested in this movie. I love Deathly Hallows Part 1, and I did want to see it all come to a head, and the hype was back with this one. So I saw this opening day. I didn't see it at midnight. The first film I ever saw at midnight was last year with Star Wars The Force Awakens, but I did see it opening day, and it was packed. And it was kind of a nice experience because I didn't see every Harry Potter film at the cinema. I discussed some I didn't see, like I didn't see 6, I didn't see 3, but it almost took me back to when I did see Philosopher's Stone and when I did see Chamber of Secrets, and I remember it being a packed house. It was exactly the same for this one, and you could tell, like, I remember the cinema foyer, just like everyone in there, it was a huge crowd. And everyone was loving it. Everyone was emotional. Everyone was there for the ride. And it was nice to be there with all Harry Potter fans. You know, there were some kids there. There were some people my age who grew up with it from the start. There were some adults. There were some old people there. It really did span the generation gap with this one. And I guess that's to be expected, with this being like a huge franchise finisher. And how many records it made. I think that's necessary. And it was nice to see that the fan base was there that had lasted for all the movies, waiting to see how it all ended ultimately.
Yeah, it was an event. I mean, we don't really get these event films anymore. They say every time an Avengers one, it's an event. It's like, no, that defeats the concept of it. An event is obviously your first Star Wars film in 10 years and a sequel from 30 years. An event film is the ending of a 10-year franchise that everyone's grown up with and everyone in the world knows about.
Mm-hmm.
Avatar is an event to a degree because it was just this absolute insane craze that everyone had to go and see.
Or like Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, exactly. These are the epitome of the event films, and this is, to me, the biggest one I've ever witnessed after Star Wars Force Awakens.
Yeah, for me, Star Wars Force Awakens, Dark Knight was massive, and going back to like 2003, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, that was, God, I mean, the experience at that movie. But this was exactly the same. It was very much in the same vein, and it was nice to be there with all the fans, especially on opening day. So let's get into the movie then, because we've got a lot to talk about. There's a lot of stuff happening in this one, although some people may just see it as like a big action climax. I don't think it is. I think there's a lot more to it. It's not like your Hobbit Battle of the Five Armies. This has a lot more going for it. So we kick off with the opening scene. Now, that's the scene that everyone's waiting for in the cinema. Like, you can't even begin to describe that feeling when there's a big film like this. You sit in that theatre, you get past all the trailers, the lights go down, and the film first starts, because you don't know what's coming. I mean, you've read the book maybe, but you don't know how the film's going to handle it. And that opening song, if we talk about the soundtrack first on this one, we usually leave it till last. So Alexandre Desplat returns after scoring Deathly Hallows Part 1. Loved the score to that one. And it's the first Harry Potter film in the whole franchise that doesn't open with a variation on John Williams' Hedwig theme. But I don't have a problem with that. It opens with a song called Lily's Theme, and the atmosphere that is generated in the first shot of the movie is just palpable. You've got all the Death Eaters outside of Hogwarts. This is nowhere near the tone. This is just so far removed from the tone you remember from the first couple of Harry Potter films. This is dark. This is end of the world. This is almost like the apocalypse for Hogwarts. The stakes are ridiculously high in this one. All done without dialogue, and you've just got Snape standing on the battlements, just looking out at the students marching almost army-like throughout the school. And then your title comes up, and just from that opening shot, it completely sets the tone. I mean, there's a flashback to the cliffhanger from Part 1, but I guess that just catches everyone up. But, I mean, it was almost tear-jerking just watching this opening scene. It's so beautiful, and the soundtrack to this movie, I would say, it even outdoes the soundtrack to Deathly Hallows Part 1, which I loved. It's such a solid score, and that just maintains all the way through the film.
Yeah, especially Lily's theme. It gets sort of redone later on in one of the pivotal scenes.
Yeah.
It's a really well-done soundtrack, especially sort of Statues, Courtyard Apocalypse. It's got some of the best songs across the whole franchise, and it still sounds like Harry Potter, although it's so different. It's darker, it's more action beaty. It still sounds like a Harry Potter soundtrack, which is a really good thing about it.
And I think more than any of the other ones, this one introduces a lot of John Williams themes back into it. Like, I know I'm jumping ahead a lot, but when Harry returns to Hogwarts with all his fellow students and it kicks in with the Harry Potter theme, it really does feel like it's tying it all together back to the original. And we'll talk much more about that in the very final scene with the 19 years later, with Leaving Hogwarts being reprised from the first two Harry Potter films. It was a really, really nice touch. I like how Desplat handled it with his new themes, integrating with them with John Williams themes, and really making it his own, because it is his own score. And it definitely has an identity of its own, but yet it does feel in keeping with everything that has come before and that has been established in the Harry Potter franchise.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the strongest.
So moving on, if we go through the film, so we go back to Dobby's grave, which was the ending of the first movie with the absolutely, as you would put it, savage death of Dobby. And we get introduced to Ollivander and Griphook again from the first film. John Hurt's just aged so much from the first movie when you see him in this film, but I guess that's part of the character, because they say that he's been weakened, he's been tortured, I think, by Voldemort. And I did always get confused with this scene. Now, I know why it makes sense in a film sense. It's been a year since we've seen the first one, and as an audience, if you are coming into Part 2 and you haven't seen Part 1, for me, that's just dumb anyway. Like, go and watch the first one first. But he basically reiterates everything about the Deathly Hallows themselves, and Harry just kind of sits there and listens to it all, and I'm like, well, a couple of days ago you were told all this by Xenophilius Lovegood in like a very, very long story of what the Deathly Hallows are, and yet Ollivander just kind of repeats it. It's very strange if you watch the two parts back to back, but I guess it makes sense if you have had that year gap. It does kind of clue all the audience up.
Yeah, it's just a sort of a nice repercussion of what happened. It's a fresh reminder, although it's the final film, there's still the Deathly Hallows as a subplot. And it's kind of cool to see a bit of that wizarding lore, especially coming from a wand maker, where you haven't really heard people talk about wands since the very first film. And it's just a cool little confirmation because he fatally accepts that the older one is a thing. And certainly Harry gets intrigued, and from that we then get the whole Gringotts planning with Griphook, who is the Warwick Davies again.
Yes, and I think you told me this. I can't remember if you said this in one of your reviews, but I think it was the whole concept of dragons being at Gringotts, and J.K. Rowling never intended for her to return to Gringotts, but it just kind of naturally happened with the progression of the story, and that was something she wanted to explore. I actually really like they go back to Gringotts because, again, this being the last one, it sort of reminds me of the flying bike action sequence from the last movie, how you do get those tie-ins back to the first movie, and it does make it feel like it's coming full circle. Even though it's very different, that was just Hagrid going to, get Harry's gold and pick up the Philosopher's Stone. We didn't really see much of the cart chase itself. We get the main foyer and then just sort of outside the vault door. This one we see so much more. You get that same foyer. You get like weird goblin security guards, which actually do kind of take me out of the movie a little bit. Like, I guess that Gringotts would have some kind of security, but that did feel a little far-fetched to me when you see like slightly taller goblins, more human-looking ones in like police security guard uniforms. But the minecart chase, I didn't see this in 3D. I went to see this in bog standard 2D, but seeing that sequence on the big screen, it was like you were in that cart. It felt like a roller coaster ride, and I don't know if it is a ride at like the Florida Harry Potter World. I expect it would be. That would be like the first natural thing I would do a ride on. But it was so nice to see just how expansive Gringotts is, and like all these caverns and caves that they go through. It was really awesome, and it adds like a nice little bit of history to the place and like a little bit of lore building with Gringotts when we do see these dragons and the waterfalls that remove spells and all the security procedures. It was really nice seeing all this extra stuff, the stuff that we had seen before and thought we knew all about from the beginning.
Yeah, and that's what I love about it. Is obviously they're guarding Lestrange's vault. They always mention that the most powerful Wizarding families have the most security, and you've got none other than the waterfall to remove all spells and stuff, but as well as that, you've got a dragon just sitting outside its vault. And the dragon itself, it's not a bizarre scene, but it's quite sort of in the character of Hermione, when there's a line where they said, it trains to expect like danger when it hears the rattling of the noises. Hermione's like, that's barbaric. I think that sort of resonates in the writing because J.K. Rowling, outside of the Harry Potter, she's sort of very, not feminist, but for rights, she's just essentially a good person that uses her status to do good, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's just a sort of representation of the dragon is that ideology of treating like lesser things as equals, and then it obviously gets its escape. But what they say about the escape, I know I'm jumping the barrel here, but when the dragon gets outside, it kind of breathes in the air for the first time in God knows how many years. So although it's a small moment, it's quite a big one. And that's
Sorry, I was going to say, because I remember that moment when it bursts out the roof, you expect it immediately to take off and like this awesome cinematic finale to the Gringotts scene. But no, you're right, it does take a breather, doesn't it? It's not like that big, massive action burst you expect.
Yeah, and it's just quite different the way they handle the sort of dragons compared to the 4th film as well. Yeah. And I quite like what they did. It varies, especially having a sort of different species of dragon. But I love the entirety of the Gringotts stuff, and what I like is obviously there's so much to cram into this film, but it's done so quickly. It just gives you a sort of a sign of what's going to come from the film, because that Gringotts finale could easily be the finale to any of the previous 6 films of that grandeur, and here it is in the opening scene.
Yeah, and we talked about the 2-film split divide last time in depth, so we won't go into it here, but again, comparing it to The Hobbit, with Battle of the Five Armies, where we kick off with the small climax, that really doesn't work as a narrative. Like, as an opening action sequence, I know you need some kind of opening action sequence, but in that film, that felt like that should have been the finale to the previous movie to completely justify that and then do something different. I'm completely happy with the Gringotts stuff being the opening one in this, because it feels like a logical middle point where we have Dobby. We talked about last time, like, there wasn't a big action finale to the previous one. It was more character driven, like Half-Blood Prince was, and I think that works for the movie with Dobby's death. It puts Harry in a very interesting place at the beginning of this one, where he's dealt with so much loss before, and I think like the death of Dobby like really does tip him over the edge and sees that, we have got to finish this quest and we have got to see it through. And I love the design of the new dragon. I mean, there's so many different species of dragon that are described in the Harry Potter universe, and it's nice to see all the different ones. Going back to Goblet of Fire, it's a shame that we don't get to see all of those other Triwizard matches, because I would have loved to have seen those other dragons up close, rather than just the one that Harry Potter fights. But no, you're right, and like with the whole Hermione thing, how she's really concerned for the dragon, I like Harry and Ron's reaction too, because Harry pretty much doesn't care, and he sees it as a means to an end, and he's focused on getting the Horcrux and getting them destroyed. Hermione's really concerned for the dragon, and then Ron's just completely like infatuated with it. Like, he is in awe of this thing, because is it his brother Charlie who works with dragons?
Yeah.
He's got that lineage in his family that maybe Ron has seen the dragons. He was the one that told Hagrid to tell Harry about the dragons and everything like that. So it's really subtle. Like, they don't dwell on it, but it does emphasize the three different personalities of the characters.
Yeah, and it's just that brilliant moment, and then the dragon obliterates the poor goblin under the Imperius curse. Which,
I feel so sorry for that guy.
He was just walking about doing his thing, and the next thing you know, he's a crisp.
Yeah, and I do question that waterfall as well, because the waterfall removes the spell, and I thought it makes you completely just like with an inability to use any kind of magic, but then they just use it again straight after. I'm like, oh well, that's pretty fucking pointless waterfall, really, isn't it? Right, it doesn't really do much. But I did want to talk about Helena Bonham Carter's performance as well, where Ron is literally just in disguise. I think it is referenced that he is meant to be using polyjuice, isn't he, of someone maybe that just looks like Ron. But Helena Bonham Carter's performance in this, so later on we get full-on Bellatrix Lestrange. In this one, she plays it so brilliantly. I think that Emma Watson, I don't know if Helena Bonham Carter shadowed Emma Watson on set to see her mannerisms and how she did the voice and everything like that, and then when she did it, she applied those same mechanics in the role. But it's very, very different to what we usually see Bellatrix Lestrange, and it does add some nice comedy as well, because when I rewatched this movie a few weeks ago, I went into it remembering it being very dark, very sort of brooding all the way through. But there is a lot of comedy with this film, and I think that's why I like that it starts off with this Gringotts thing, is that, yes, you still have the end goal of the mission in mind, like, you still know what they have to do and how dark the film is going to get. And although it's not like laugh out loud whimsical like the first two maybe, it still does have that comedy to it, and I think that Helen Bonham Carter brings that, especially when she's approaching the bank and like I think like one of the Death Eaters or like a dodgy person in Nocturne Alley walks past her and says like, "Evening, Madame Lestrange," and she's just like, "Good morning," and she's like, you know, naive little Hermione Granger. I loved all that stuff, and you're right, I can't remember the name of the goblin you just mentioned, but he's really funny too.
Yeah, and I think what I love about the Lestrange stuff is the story is they pulled they pulled Emma Watson out on set, and they had Hermione to act out every scene.
Mm-hmm.
So Bellatrix would almost essentially impersonate Emma Watson, how Emma Watson would do it. There's a really weird sort of circle to it. So Emma Watson is playing the character who Lestrange plays, I forgot her name, Helena Bonham Carter, and then it's Hermione again on top of the voice. There's like 3 layers to it.
Yeah.
But it gives it this dynamic because it's so funny. She can't walk on heels properly.
Yeah.
And she's just there like, "Oh, hello," and they're like, "You can't talk like that." Bellatrix would never be like that. It's just Hermione trying to be a nasty person. It's so funny.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I mean that whole Gringotts stuff's fantastic. And again, what I like about it is it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's very sort of, you know, you get the Horcrux, you get that great sequence where all the gold multiplies as well, which I think is probably what the front cover is now that I've seen the film. Because I remember seeing that front cover and having no idea what it was, and then after seeing the film, so they break out. There's that great dragon sequence, and then we really just straight away head to Hogsmeade after that, and we get introduced to Aberforth. I don't believe we got a glimpse of him in the previous movie, or did we see him in the Shard of Glass in part 1?
So you see him in the Shard of Glass, but you're never meant to know who it is. If you want, technically Aberforth was seen in the 5th film when they do Dumbledore's army. It's just a guy with a goat in the bar. At this point, no one knew that it was Aberforth Dumbledore, and because he's not important in it. And obviously, the 7th book hadn't come out when they filmed the 5th film too. So there was that minor bit of knowledge which J.K. didn't need to tell them.
And we have Mance Rayder himself playing Aberforth. He's a nice. Go on, sorry.
I was going to say he looks nothing like the actor. There's so much makeup on him and prosthetic. It's really hard to see a performance from him, but he's got the right look of kind of related to Dumbledore, but his own man.
I was going to say he is very, very different to Dumbledore. And I guess that kind of goes for the character as well, how they say, like, for some reason no one ever mentions Aberforth. Like, he definitely keeps to himself. And he's not a huge character in this. We learned that he was the one who sent Dobby to try and rescue them, and he has been watching them through the glass to keep an eye on them. But we do get quite a nice bit of history on Dumbledore, and we'll talk much more about Dumbledore later on with the Snape flashbacks, but I mean, we think we've known the character up until this point, like his tragic death in the end of Half-Blood Prince. We get so many more layers to his character, and I think this is the first stepping point, and not to go too in depth with Fantastic Beasts and where to find them, because ultimately we don't inherently know what they're going to do with that. But there's a lot they can do with the Dumbledore character which relates back to this stuff. So we get a look at Ariana, which was Dumbledore's sister, who was killed, I think, during a duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald. And Dumbledore basically always blamed himself, but with Aberforth he says that, you know, basically it happened, he never talked about her, it's not like he even remembered who she was or me, he very much kept himself to himself, he was mad with power. But then, you know, so this brings a different side to the side of Dumbledore that we haven't seen, especially when you go back to like film 1 and 2. I know that was played by Richard Harris and he very much brought a different personality to him, but it's still the same character, still the same history. And well, when we talked about in Half-Blood Prince where he takes the potion of despair or whatever it is, you do know that he has just buried this tragedy inside himself for all these years, and it has been eating him up inside. He's just never expressed it, and that's what it makes it just, you have that very morally grey area where you do connect with Dumbledore and you do feel sorry for him, but also you start to kind of hate the guy in this one a little bit. Like, he's not the clear-cut good guy who was protecting Harry Potter. We get a lot of information about that later on. And
I like the fact that they do this change of Dumbledore, that he's not the perfect 10 as they would make him out to be.
Yeah.
It's the whole build-up. The films don't show it as well because it's almost impossible to show, obviously, the thoughts of people in a book compared to a thought in a film. It's almost impossible. So what they have is, throughout the book, there's this whole Harry doesn't know the truth. He's questioning that Dumbledore told him so little about his life. He can't get over the fact that Dumbledore had a brother and sister. The whole Rita Skeeter book angle plays a massive part in the book, as does meeting Elphias Dodge from the first film, who's kind of really pointless in part 1, but it plays into his questioning of Dumbledore. And the Aberforth scenes are brilliant because it goes into the whole tale with Dumbledore's sister Ariana, that, you know, he doesn't know if she killed him, this happened, that happened, blah blah blah, and they kind of rectify it later on at the train station. But it's just this sort of the depth scene, and I really hope they explore it, because there's a lot they can explore in Fantastic Beasts, and that's certainly going to be one of the things, especially given that it's a younger Dumbledore. But it's just nice getting that backstory, because you don't really know anything about him, it's just everyone loves him.
Yeah, and I think what this film's really about, especially with the characters of Dumbledore and Snape, is a position shift in terms of our perspectives on them. We describe, I think it was last time with Half-Blood Prince when Snape kills Dumbledore, how we never really had that experience of hating Snape and believing he was a villain and then seeing the redemption in this movie. I guess it's also, you could compare it to sort of the twist in Empire Strikes Back with Vader and I Am Your Father, how we never really had that. Well, I never did anyway. I never had that shocking twist moment where that's revealed, and it's the same with this movie. And I like that we get that position shift throughout the character. So if we're talking about Snape now, we get onto Hogwarts, so Neville finds Harry. It's a nice reintroduction moment for those two, and a reintroduction for us to Neville, who's now badass Neville. We'll get onto that much later, but he is one of the standout characters in this film and definitely cements him as a fan favourite. So we get to Hogwarts, we see that it's in just complete and utter dire straits. They've almost militarised all the students there. There's a really throwaway line with Neville which always makes me laugh, where he says they were trying to make us practice the Cruciatus Curse on first years, which is just hilarious in my opinion, so I'd probably be like a Slytherin or something at Hogwarts. But we get the sacking of Snape, so we get Alan Rickman, R.I.P., who delivers one of the slowest, most Shakespearean and punctuated monologues in film history, where he's addressing the students when he believes that they're harbouring Harry Potter. And I just love Snape in this movie. This is his movie in my opinion, followed very, very closely by Ralph Fiennes.
Yeah, the whole sacking of Snape scene is absolutely incredible, because he's so cold, and obviously that's what he does throughout all the films, but there's the sort of seriousness to him for once. Is there like, who is hiding? He was like, your punishment will be severe, something like that. I'm not going to try and do his voice, but it's just this brilliant moment. And then Harry's hiding there, no idea where he got his Gryffindor clothes from. Has he been keeping them in his backpack? I do not know. Was it in the room of requirement? I do not know.
There's just had spares lying around.
He's just there. The Carrows done an awful job of watching the students coming into the Great Hall, because you would recognise Harry.
Yeah.
There's glasses, a scar, and his wanted poster everywhere in the world, so they're not doing very well as Voldemort's school enforcers. And then you have just the standout moments of the "how dare you stand where he stood" moment.
Yeah, which is a meme I have used a lot, especially with this recent US election we've had.
Yeah, there's been some brilliant memes throughout the whole Harry Potter franchise recently. And then you get, personally, one of my favourite scenes of the entire series from one of my favourite characters, which is just McGonagall losing her shit in the most silent tone, the most standout moment, where she just walks out and the whole school backs off. They're like, shit's going down, something's going to go wrong. And McGonagall's just going for Snape. And the reason I love this, it's not because it's a power shift of McGonagall finally becoming the headmistress. It's the fact that Snape won't fight back, and every spell he does is Protego. And he takes out both Carrows, if you watch the clip carefully, which is very important. So even the seeds are in place for the memory scene later on. And it's just the brilliant fight, the pure silence. There's no soundtrack at this point. Everyone's watching. And then when he does jump out the window and kind of fly away, the lights go on, and here comes the Hogwarts theme, and everyone's excited for about 2 minutes.
And that whole Minerva McGonagall thing where she steps up, she always had that history with Dumbledore, I thought. Even since movie 1, like, you could tell she genuinely cared a lot about him. I don't know if there's any, like... Well, obviously it's not a romantic thing, because we learned that Dumbledore's homosexual. I think that was announced in, like, Order of the Phoenix, wasn't it? Or Half-Blood Prince or something, when J.K. Rowling announced that. But I know that you could tell Minerva did think a lot of Dumbledore. So when this moment happens, it's kind of like the moment in Lion King with the "I killed Mufasa" moment, and then all the lionesses attack. It reminds me a lot like that. But again, it's a side to McGonagall we've never seen before. We know she's always been sassy, but she really steps up a game in this one. And we'll get onto it in a minute, where they start protecting Hogwarts, and she summons all the statues, which is one of my favourite sequences in the whole film. The music and just everything. And she still does have that, like, little, that innocent quality to it, where she's like, oh, I've always wanted to use that spell. She does have that nice side to her still. And when she says, like, Harry, it's good to have you back, it's a really nice moment. And you do feel for Snape in that moment, because ultimately, although if you're watching these movies in order and you don't know anything about the whole flashback scene, at this moment you still think Snape's a bad guy, and he's just fled. But it's such a heartbreaking moment when McGonagall stands up to him, because although we haven't really seen much back and forth between Snape and McGonagall, you know that he thinks a lot of her too. I mean, they've been colleagues for so many years, and he was close to Dumbledore, which probably means he was close to McGonagall too. It's just really, really sad that happens. So after that, we get introduced to another Horcrux, the whole diadem of Ravenclaw, how they need to find it. And we return to a character that we have seen in the series before, back to Philosopher's Stone, played by a different actress. Very blink and you'll miss it when the 4 house ghosts show up. But he has to find Rowena Ravenclaw, isn't it? Is it Rowena Ravenclaw he has to find?
It's
her daughter.
It's her daughter, the Grey Lady, but it's her mother's diadem, which is the lost item.
Yeah.
Bit of trivia. You find out in the book, as usual, that she had a very horrific death, which they didn't need to put in the film. But what you find out is that the Bloody Baron, who is the Slytherin ghost, is the one that killed her. And then he killed himself because he couldn't live with the consequences of his actions. So there's a bit of character moments there. Obviously, there's nothing to do with the ghosts in the film, so there's no point in them bringing that up.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily like the Ravenclaw scene, but I like the fact the diadem's in the room of requirement.
Yeah, and just going back to the whole ghost thing, I mentioned how I can't remember which Harry Potter film they start cutting them out of, but I think it might be from 4 onwards. It's nice to actually see a reference to the ghosts again, because that was an element I always loved in the early Harry Potter films, where someone would just be walking down a corridor in a class and you'll just see like a ghost just like going about their business. Like there's a moment in Philosopher's Stone where there's just a ghost like writing lines or doing an exam or something, just casually in the classroom. and it added a lot of history, I thought, to Hogwarts and the whole atmosphere to it. So it's nice to see them back in this one. And I think I read the trivia that Kate Winslet was originally going to play the Grey Lady in this one, but they recast it. I can't remember the name of the actress they got. I really like her in it, actually. And not only do we return to that, but we also return to the Chamber of Secrets as well. I mean, the Diadem whole subplot of that goes on for way well, it doesn't go on for way too long, but they dwell on it quite a lot. There's a lot of action scenes that pick up from it. We go back to the Chamber of Secrets with Ron and Hermione. Exactly the set as you remember it, and the skeleton of the basilisk. I'm a huge, me with continuity between the films, like why has Flitwick changed appearance and how they shifted from Chamber of Secrets to Azkaban. But I'm really glad the skeleton of the basilisk is in exactly the same position it was when it died in Chamber of Secrets. Like little things like that I always pick up on, and I love when they pay homage to that. And it's just, again, it makes it feel like it's going full circle, not just to the first one but to the first few. It's tying in elements from all the different Harry Potter films and just culminating it into one. And it's just nice seeing that set again. I mean, the Chamber of Secrets set itself is one of my favourite just standout sets they built for these movies. It's really, really impressive. It's nice to see it again in this movie.
Yeah, and I love the fact they do go back to the Chamber of Secrets, because in the book, what basically happens is, oh, where's Ron and Hermione? Oh, I don't know, they said they're going to the toilet. They come back a few pages later like, oh yeah, we were at the Chamber of Secrets. We destroyed it with a basilisk fan because it's linked to the Gryffindor sword. And I love the fact they showed it because it's such a nice throwback to that second film, because there's less and less of the throwbacks to the first as the series continues. And it's just really cool seeing that set again. I love it.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that's the advantage that a film has over a book, how you can constantly keep cutting to all these different characters and showing what they do. I mean, that sounds really bizarre to do that off page, especially because they destroy a Horcrux. And then there's another Horcrux, isn't there? Or is this still the Diadem where they go into the Room of Requirement?
So the Ravenclaw's Lost Diadem is in the Room of Requirement.
They destroy the cup, don't they? That's the one they destroy.
The cup's destroyed,
yeah, that's it.
Followed by the kiss, which we've waited many films for.
And, oh my god, the scene transition after that, which has been parodied many, many times on the internet. I don't want to talk about Voldemort now because he so totally deserves his own section in this film. But you get the kiss, and then straight after that you get like a really awkward Voldemort moment. Like right after, which is always hilarious to watch. But yeah, so let's talk about the destruction of the other Horcrux, the Diadem, in the Room of Requirement. Nice going back to that room again, and another tie into the other ones. I think reading the trivia, it says you can see one of the chess pieces from Philosopher's Stone. I've never noticed that, but you do see one of the Cornish pixies from Gilderoy Lockhart's amazing Defense Against the Dark Arts class from Chamber of Secrets. Nice little Easter egg. I love stuff like that, and again, tying it back into the old ones. So we get Draco finally back in this movie, and he's being a little shit like he was in the first two, just trying to cause mischief, try to kill Harry Potter. All the other times we've seen him just sort of like casually just try to annoy him. In this one, he is straight up trying to murder him. At least his cronies are. When they set the whole place on fire, is it Fiend Fire? Is that what it's called, I think?
Yeah, so it's a curse that the Carrows have been teaching, very advanced dark magic. I think it's the spell Voldemort uses in the fifth film in the Duel Against Dumbledore.
With a snake?
Yeah. They've never confirmed that, but my suspicion's there that it's a spell that takes on its own form.
Yeah.
I love this scene because not only has it got great character moments, in the book, sorry to say again, Crabbe dies. Which is a shame because obviously the actor's a bit of a mentalist and found himself in prison, so he couldn't film it. Yeah. So they used Blaze instead. However, for the sacrifice, they used Goyle because it would make sense to kill off Goyle, who's been in it for 8 films, rather than someone that's been in it for 2.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I love the fact that he just randomly falls into the fire, and he was in every single TV spot before the film came out.
It's brutal. It's a brutal moment. I mean, characters straight up get murdered in this film. It really does come to a head. A lot of people go out and, the characters that you might not really care about all that much. I mean, I don't think we've seen Crabbe in it all that much since the first few films. He's kind of very much in the background after that. But even still, you remember him from those first movies, so there is still kind of an impact when he dies.
Yeah, and it happens to everyone. I have a death list that we'll read out later, and every year J.K. Rowling tweets on the anniversary about the Hogwarts an apology for someone she killed. But the Room of Requirement scene, I always laugh because you see Hermione on a broomstick as well for the first time, which just looks really weird. I can't get my head around it still. But the scene, I think, is really well done with sort of the battle inside of it. Almost the destruction of the Room of Requirement, because it has played a massive part in the final few films. and ultimately the destruction of yet again another Horcrux.
Yeah, and the CGI looks great as well, how they integrate the animals into the fire. It really does look great. And also, what probably one of my favourite lines from the movie is from Ron when he chases them down, when he says, "That's my girlfriend, you numpty." That got a huge laugh from everyone in the audience. Yeah, it's just a great scene, great Draco moment as well, and we'll talk about his character arc when we come back to him towards the end of the film. There was also a cut scene towards the end of the film, which I really want to talk about. So we're talking about the attack on Hogwarts, and we're going to talk about the character deaths in a moment. But can we talk about the perpetrator of these crimes? I think we need to talk about Voldemort. We have talked about Voldemort quite a lot, especially with Goblet of Fire. This is his standout movie out of all of them. If you weren't behind Ralph Fiennes as Voldemort in any of the previous movies, by God, you will be in this one. He is loving every single moment in this film. And Ralph, you know, we talked about him not being very menacing. He has his moments here and there. We talked about the one where he kills the Hogwarts teacher in Deathly Hallows Part 1. He is just hilarious in this movie. And whether that's the Voldemort you want, I mean, I can understand if people wanted a purely just terrifying, intimidating Voldemort all the way through. I don't really think he has that impact in this movie, especially when he confronts them all at the end. But he's like Palpatine from Revenge of the Sith, you know, like I can't hate this guy. He's just hamming it up, he's just having the time of his life, and that shows through in every single frame of his performance in this film, and it's fantastic. There's so many, every single Voldemort scene in this film I could talk about for an hour. He's just marvellous. And just going back to the trailer really briefly, the many noises of Voldemort, the many noises of Ralph Fiennes' Voldemort. I remember when the original trailer came out for this thing, and like Voldemort, he does that like that, and that must have played like about 7 or 8 times in the trailer. And I remember pinpointing the locations of all of them, and when I was watching the movie I was really hoping to hear all of them, and I think they pretty much just cut them all out because the fan feedback on YouTube was hilarious. Like there were timestamps for each one he did in the trailer. There's the big one with "Let's finish this the way we started it together," and that's cut out of the movie. Oh god, I'm rambling anyway. Talk about Voldemort, because I can just go on and on with this.
I always talk about Voldemort. He's a man of pure madness. He wears his bare feet. And we have a moment where he slaughters not the younglings, the goblins.
He kills everyone in Gringotts, doesn't he?
All of them. And he's just walking through their corpses with his cold feet.
Through the blood?
Yeah, and he doesn't give a fucking damn. He's just chatting to his snake like nothing's changed, and Lucius is terrified in the corner of the room. Don't know if that's in the film.
Yeah, no, it is.
It is good.
You see his expression, yeah.
Good. Run, Lucius, run. You do not deserve to go out to a goblin murderer.
He runs at the end.
And I just remember, like, Griphook was a bit of a prick, let's be honest.
Yeah, he had it coming.
And then you just see him dead, and you're like, get in, Voldemort. Well played, my friend. One down. Then he just killed all of the elves.
I will say, though, when we see Griphook's dead body, we see the Godric Gryffindor sword, and I know you were talking about the Horcruxes, how, you know, he wanted to tie them to something personal in his life, so he had one from each of the founders of Hogwarts apart from Gryffindor. I'm very surprised he didn't take the sword for himself in that scene.
That's because the sword disappears
before he sees it, or
I don't know if I don't know if he sees it or if Griphook was hiding it, but you just see the sword evaporate because it can only present itself to a true Gryffindor.
Yeah.
So that's why he was never able to get his hands on it the first time, but it kind of makes for a cool little nod to the reveal of it later on with Neville and the Sorting Hat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can't remember, is Bellatrix present at that scene? Or is she still...
I can't remember. I'm wondering if she's given birth to her baby yet.
Oh, cursed child.
But except for that, it's just this nasty scene where it kind of ties into part 1, and it's just the reveal that he knows about the Horcruxes.
Yeah.
And Hogwarts is next. That's why Harry has the idea, but that's just one Voldemort scene. There are so many. There's him just executing the Minister of Magic on top of a hill for talking to him. The fact he spends half the battle sitting on top of a hill with everyone next to him, just making noises together. The fact that an army of Death Eaters can't defeat one shield, so he just obliterates the whole thing of pure anger. He's just glorious.
Yeah, and I think his standout scenes pretty much come towards the end of the film, so we'll talk about those in a minute, but like, how long was he holding that spell for, like, on the shield itself? Because it feels like it goes on for ages before he absolutely destroys it. And I don't know. Anyway, we'll move on to the Battle of Hogwarts itself. So going back a little bit before that shield, that initial moment where they are using all the protective charms around Hogwarts is fantastic. We see Slughorn, Molly Weasley, McGonagall's like the director. She's orchestrating the whole battle. She sends the statues out. She has a nice moment with Flitwick, which I think is their first interaction, at least from what I can remember. It's a really nice moment. It really ramps up that huge epic quality that's going to follow in the battle. So then we finally get to the battle. Now, really, there's a few skirmishes here and there which are really cool. The best bit for me is when you've got Harry, Ron and Hermione trying to get across the courtyard, and there's this huge montage of them trying to get across, and it's really epic, and the cinematography and just the choreography of the whole thing's fantastic. The one problem I have with the attack on Hogwarts, now I know this is going to be better in the book because there's just, you can devote more time to it, there's more pages, more characters, you can focus on everyone. All the favourite characters, all the side characters, and this sort of started to come in with Deathly Hallows Part 1, like we mentioned it with Mad-Eye Moody where he's killed off camera. The deaths of Lupin, Tonks, and is it Fred that dies?
Yep.
Yeah. They happen off screen. And we get some great moments where we do cut back to them and there's like a nice one shot where you see them all using spells against each other. There was a great deleted scene where Tonks shows up with Lupin on the wall and he says like, you shouldn't have turned up here, you should be at home looking after Teddy, and she says it's you who needs me tonight. I wanted more of that, and I know the film's got to get, do so much, but I think the film itself is only like 2 hours 10 minutes long. So again, it's one of those examples where they definitely could have added more. I'm sure they could have added like 10-15 minutes more of the battle maybe with other characters. I think if they'd had fleshed out the characters more, we could have seen more of Lupin, we could have seen them die in action. I think that would have really ramped up the emotion to the film. Not to say there is a lack of sadness or emotion in the film. This is probably the most hard-hitting out of all the Harry Potter films. It's definitely a tearjerker in many moments in this film. But it's sad to see where you have created all these wonderful characters that we love, like Lupin and Tonks, and then you never get to see them bow out or, die defending others or, try to save Hogwarts or anything like that. I can understand why it works in the film, because when Harry gets there, after everything he's been through, you are kind of in that moment with him where it's his first time reaction to seeing these people die, and it is the audience, like when you get that realization that they've all gone. But nevertheless, I think it would have been more emotionally impactful if we had have actually seen them gone out in action in a scene in the film.
Yeah, and I'm only going to talk about one of the book comparisons, which is Fred Weasley, because there's, across the 5th book onwards, there's this really nicely done subplot with Percy Weasley where he betrays the Weasleys, he hates them all, returns with their presents and stuff. On the 5th one, as he works to Ministry, the whole Voldemort's not back. Then the 6th one, that although they know Voldemort's back, he still won't talk to them because he's too arrogant to sort of apologise to them. You've got this great moment in the 7th book where Weasley just appears for the Battle of Hogwarts and Molly starts crying because they haven't really seen each other in so long. There's this nod of respect between him, Fred, George, all the others. But what you get is this incredible scene, and Harry's present for it, which makes it sad that they didn't include it in the film. Harry, Ron and Hermione, it's just after the Room of Requirement. Percy is duelling the Minister of Magic, who Voldemort has already killed in this point of the film. And for the first ever time, Percy makes a joke, and I don't know what Fred's last words are, but he says, "Blimey, Percy, I don't think I've ever heard you make a joke since." And then there's an explosion on the wall, and the explosion obviously kills Fred, a part of it, but there's this massive scene with Ron where Ron and Percy just won't leave the body, although there's like spells being shot at them to kill them and stuff from other Death Eaters around them. It's this really powerful moment, especially even with Harry and Hermione. And it's a shame because I don't want to sound bad. I love Fred and George. Everyone does. They're easy. It's one of the best double acts in cinema. And it feels not cheap, but there's this awful slow-mo shot of Fred.
Yeah.
It looks like he's getting stupefied, which I'd assume is actually meant to be his death. But it's really badly done, and you see him dead in the hall, and I get the impact of the death because you get the whole Weasley family there for that scene, and that's quite a powerful moment with Molly sort of sitting on the body. And it's sad to see one of the Weasleys go because they are the only normal Wizarding family. They're a family that everyone loves, and especially it being one of the two twins. And I really don't like how that's shown in the film. There's a really good scene between George, I'll speak about later on, but I don't think they handled that death the way they should have. Lupin and Tonks is an interesting one. I wish they did a bit more with it because he just sees their body together holding hands, which sort of sick person would move the bodies together so they're holding hands that didn't know about it. I don't know. But the impact of that is there's no one around the dead bodies. You can't see that in the film. Whereas in the book, they're just isolated because no one really knows who they are. Although Lupin taught them for a year, that seems to be forgotten about. But you're right, they do deserve a bit of screen time. It just gives them the farewells that they deserve, each of them.
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm going to compare it back to Lord of the Rings again, because I know I always talk about the Lord of the Rings in these reviews too, you get to Return the King, and especially the extended cut of that movie, which is, again, like just over 4 hours. I think it's like 4 hours, 4 hours, 10 minutes, something like that. But that film treats every character and just with the utmost importance, just rounds off every single character arc. Even for side characters, there's callbacks to characters you see in the first movie. It really is like the whole package for an ending film in a franchise, I think, with that movie. And it's a shame to see that this film didn't get that treatment too. Now, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that this movie needs to be 4 hours. I think like with 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes at most with those scenes added, I think it would just added more. I mean, I don't think the action in this film overstays its welcome, especially with these Part 2 movies where, I mean, we talk about it all the time, where the plots stretch so thin and there's not enough material to justify the running time of the movie, so the whole movie feels like one big action sequence. This one really doesn't, and I don't know if it's because we focus on Harry, Ron and Hermione, mostly Harry in this one. I mean, the previous one was the one with the 3, this one's very much on Harry, and that's what it needs to be. He's the protagonist, he's the main one, he's the one that's got to undertake this task and ultimately see it through to the end. So there's a lot of stuff with him, there's a lot of character moments, there's a lot of revelations, there's still a lot of material there to justify it being its own movie, but nevertheless, it's a shame that we don't get to see these types of characters that we've cared about since, like, you know, the third movie with Lupin. And I mean, Lupin was always one of my favourite characters. David Thewlis was fantastic in these films, and it's a shame to see that he didn't have as much to do as the films sort of like got from, like, you know, the 5th one onwards. It's just a shame. I mean, it's not a huge deal. It doesn't weaken the film by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just a thought of, like, what could have been if all these scenes are in it. I mean, I didn't even know about that Percy scene you just mentioned. I didn't even know Percy came back in the book in the final one. That would have been a nice scene. I can see why they didn't bring Percy back for it. Like, you didn't have to have that whole moment in there, but something similar, like a homage to that scene where the wall does get broken, or maybe Ron, you know, has that moment like he does in the hall where he stays by the body. That would have been nice. But if we get onto the other death section as well, because a lot of other characters die too, is there any ones we've missed? I know we see Lavender Brown in a really quick shot from who's the character with the whole 1-1 thing from Half-Blood Prince. We see her dead on the floor. I think she's getting snacked on by the werewolf Death Eater, isn't she, if I remember rightly?
Fenrir Greyback's having a munch.
Yeah.
Good riddance.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember any other characters that die.
They don't show it in the film, but poor old Colin Creevy, the one with the camera. Too? Yeah, he's dead. He probably was trying to take a picture of someone doing the killing curse. Didn't end too well for you, son. We have Scabier and the Snatchers.
Oh, this scene's amazing. And again, if we like going back to the first one, this is where I like when they have references to the first ones with Seamus Finnegan and his penchant for blowing stuff up and pyrotechnics, which gets used to deadly effect in this one where they blow up the bridge.
It's one of the funniest scenes in the sort of the 3 scenes that transition Neville from Neville to being the badass. Yeah, it was this one where everyone at the cinema was just crying with laughter when the 2 Snatchers just run into the shield and evaporate, I think. Yeah. And we've got the Russell Brand lookalike Scabier, who's just there like, I'm gonna fucking have you eventually, mate. And Neville's there like, yeah, you and whose army? Ha ha ha. Chuckle, chuckle. It was absolutely hilarious seeing that at the cinema. And it's just that brilliant moment that once the shield's down,
it's the look on, it's look on both of their faces.
Yeah, it's just Neville slowly like, oh no, and the guy's like, do I risk walking an inch forward?
And it's that slow footstep he takes on the grass, like afterwards.
And then he's alive, and he's just like, I think he shouts. Neville's like, oh shit, and just runs, and it's just this brilliant moment of everyone. It reminds me of Star Wars 4 when you have Han and Chewbacca running at the stormtroopers, then turning around and running back because there's hundreds more, and it's when they're all on the bridge and that obviously they destroy it. Then it turns from everyone trying to kill Neville to everyone trying to get to Neville to get to safety, and it was just this really funny scene that I'm happy it did make the film, because that wasn't in the book or anything like that. it was one of these great subplots that give character depth to it. It's like a nice tie into the Seamus character, because he's not really seen in the later films, but he deserves to be in that sort of final ending aspect. Save Neville, who obviously has a lot to do later on. But it's just a really well done comedic scene in a dark film, and it works.
Yeah, and you get that reveal where, I mean, you know that Neville's not dead, but everyone else thinks he is, and then he climbs back up, and there's like this fanfare that plays in the soundtrack, which is great. I think it's almost like Neville's theme in this one. I think it plays at the end as well when, you know, he gets blasted through the wall and then wakes up. I think that same theme kicks in. It's nice to see Neville step up as well, and if you go back to like Philosopher's Stone, it's just a far cry from what he was in that film when he was like the cowardly little kid who got, you know, what was it, 10 points or 50 points for standing up to his friends at the end. It's nice to see Neville become this, and I think it works as well because we've had so many films where we haven't really seen him, or he's only been in the background, and it's nice to see him come back to the forefront. I don't think there's any other deaths. I'm trying to think. I think everyone else is pretty much what we've already talked about. So we're really on to the big death now. It was the one that we knew was coming, and it's heartbreaking to watch it back then, and even more heartbreaking now. The death of Snape. Now, I remember going to see this movie, and I mean, I loved Alan Rickman, I always have, and I always loved his delivery of the Snape character, how he was very Shakespearean. He was very much like hamming it up for the camera, like he was like in a stage play or something. And when I heard that Snape dies in the book, I was thinking, this is going to be hilarious, because Alan Rickman is just going to have like this long Shakespeare monologue, like, oh, cruel death, cruel fate, like all that, and just, I would be like pissing myself in the cinema. That's really not what I got. What I got was like one of the most stark and just like hard-hittingly real deaths I've ever seen. So Voldemort says to him that, you know, the wand is resisting me, like I can feel it resisting me. I'm not its true master. The true master is the person who disarmed Dumbledore when he was killed. That was you, Snape. You've been a good and faithful servant, but I'm sorry, you gotta go, because I want the wand. And he sets Nagini on him. Which I always thought, like, does that technically make Nagini Master of the Elder Wand? Like, because Nagini was the one that killed Snape. But, as like, because, I mean, I've never witnessed, like, a snake bite in anything else before, but the fact that you don't even see it, it's, like, behind a screen, and you just hear, like, the thud of the snake biting into him, and, like, Snape hitting the glass behind him. It's absolutely fucking horrible to watch. It's absolutely devastating. And then the scene that follows... I mean, I'm going to let you talk about the death now because I don't want to just go on for like another 5 minutes talking about this, but it's really not the Shakespeare monologue I was expecting. It's so real, and Alan Rickman's just... You get all the emotion from him in this one. It's what I say. This is absolutely his movie.
It's an absolute savagery.
Yeah.
What always gets me before the snake bite, it's the whole slow build-up of Snape turning the cogs and working, well, I'm fucked.
Yeah.
And he's still there, I will get Potter, and it was like, you're not listening to me, are you? It's not Potter I want. I need to kill you because you've got the one from Dumbledore. And before you get the snake bites, it's that spell where it's almost, it feels like he slits his throat with his wand, but he doesn't. But obviously it's a spell that does something similar. And then it is the Nagini bites, which is brutal because you do see blood starting to sort of go on the walls as Harry, Ron and Hermione are walking past. And it's a really nasty scene. And at the point, obviously, it's made that people are meant to, or Harry certainly is meant to sort of hate Snape at this point. And even though he detests him, he doesn't know the truth yet. He's really, you know, he feels sorry for the guy. Especially the fact that Voldemort would just kill a number 2 straight up like that without any remorse. And I think that's what sells it. But obviously, you then get the whole take my memories, which is that bit's not powerful, but it's when he says you have your mother's eyes.
Yeah.
And then,
which is a line that's been used throughout a lot of the films. A lot of people have said, but it's the emotional resonance that comes from it when Snape says it, who's a character that's pretty much what we've thought has always hated him and always had that animosity between him. To have that moment of understanding seconds before his death just makes it all the more impactful with that line. And
it's the first time Snape's ever spoke about Lily to Harry.
Yeah.
Because he always spoke about how he hated James Potter, he's this, that and the other. Never, ever any mention of Lily Potter, so credit to obviously JK for not doing that, except the Mudblood line in the 5th book, but also credit to the directors because they wanted to. They could have easily chucked in a fake line here or there that regarded Lily Potter as part of it. but they never did. And it's just that 1 second where Harry turns around and he's like, oh dear. Not oh dear, but he realises that there's something more going on, which is why he's got to take the memories, I think. If Snape doesn't say, you've got your mother's eyes, Harry might not bother looking at them.
Yeah. And that takes us on to the next moment with Snape's memories, which, I mean, I don't want to spoil your countdown. I'm sure it got in there somewhere, but this, if I'm going with my favourite Harry Potter moments, this is by far number one for me. The whole memory flash, and it goes on for about, it's like a 5 or 10 minute sequence. I think it definitely feels like it. They really do linger on this sequence. It's nice. We get shots from the first Harry Potter movies. They go through all the films. I think we see flashbacks to Philosopher's Stone before that as well. It's one of the most beautifully put together, edited, just music, composition, acted moments I've ever seen in the film. It really is the culmination of all this talent, and it's beautiful. We get more insight into Dumbledore, where we learn that, you know, he's been raising Harry like a pig for slaughter, which gives so much gravitas to the Dumbledore character that when you rewatch it again and watch them all, whether she initially had that idea in mind, I don't know, especially when we get with like Richard Harris's performance, for example. You really don't get that aspect to him. You did get the impression that he cared for him. But the line with Dumbledore when he says, like, don't tell me, you know, you suddenly care for the boy, you're like, whoa, Dumbledore, like, has this always been an act? Like, because you know that this is going to happen. It's horrible, but I'm think this is probably going to be best if we keep passing it back to each other, because there's so much that's revealed in this moment.
Yeah. First of all, it is the best scene of the Harry Potter franchise. It's one of the best scenes I've ever seen in cinema. Rewatching it several times this year has been a lot tougher. Obviously, the passing of Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
But in the sense that I've never been into Harry Potter more than I am now. So it sort of resonates with me, especially as I've gone from a sort of 14, 15-year-old to watching it at the age of 20. Although I'm still young, it resonates a lot more with certain aspects of everything. But it's one of the few perfect scenes. It's the entire intercutting between the Snape at Godric's Hollow, which isn't in the book. I'll make that abundantly clear. That's one of the best things they did, was putting Snape at Godric's Hollow, because the way they intercut that with each sort of time aspect of Snape's life is so well done, leading up to the sort of pinnacle, and we'll go through each little bit individually, but it's just so well done. The score, the cinematography, the editing, both performances, even off Dumbledore, even if it's only a few lines, it ties the knot to not only Snape's story but the Harry Potter saga, you could say. And it's absolutely stunning while being heartbreaking at the same time.
Yeah, it's almost like that through line throughout all of the franchise, like this one core connective thread that just ties everything together, gives us a whole new perspective on Snape and Dumbledore. And you're right, how it's edited, we get sort of like a scene will progress and then it will cut to something else that came before, and then we'll arrive at that scene again later on. Like, it's just the beauty of how this is edited is fantastic, and ultimately it's the most heartbreaking story of someone getting friend zoned I've ever seen. And it's heartbreaking because we do see just how much Snape cared for Lily, and in the previous movies we'd got insight into how James bullied him. I don't know if we see a little bit more of that, I think, but you can even tie those flashbacks into this one as well. But you're right, the Godric's Hollow scene. See, I didn't realise that wasn't in the book, and I think when I eventually get to Deathly Hallows, the book, and read that for the first time, it's going to be very interesting when I read this sequence to see how it compares from the book to this one. It's haunting seeing that image where he walks in, and how Rickman just plays it where, like, he barely enters the doorway and he immediately sees it and he just like falls down to the ground in grief, and then it cuts back a few scenes later where he's just holding a dead body, just sobbing over it. And I'm almost getting misty-eyed talking about it now. It's beautifully acted from Rickman. I would probably say, like, I know he's had a lot of great film roles in the past with, like, you know, you look at Hans Gruber or The Sheriff of Nottingham, which are very, very funny, over-the-top roles for Rickman. Seeing this scene, Snape is his best role he's ever played, in my opinion. Yeah, and there's so many roles he will be remembered for, but ultimately Snape is the one. And this is the scene, I mean, we spoke before that J.K. Rowling, he wouldn't take on the role, and J.K. Rowling told him the entire of the Lily subplot, that he was in love with Harry's mum, which is why he hates Harry to some degree, but also why he cares for Harry in the other degree. Yeah. And what I love about this flashback in general is it's not just the story of Snape, it's the story of how he loses Lily to James and how that progresses as it carries on.
And although it's only 9 minutes long, it's certainly a candidate to be one of the greatest short films you could ever see. You could explore that on its own, and it would probably still make people weep today.
Yeah, and it's so sad because Snape never had that. He never had that moment where everything worked out for him. And it's the line that gets me all the time when he conjures the Patronus and it's a doe, which is the same Patronus that Lily had, and Dumbledore's like, Lily, even after all this time, and he goes, always. And he's carried that with him through all those years, just all the misery and just woe that he's gone through in his life, not getting the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. The love of his life is taken by this arrogant douchebag in James Potter. And, you imagine the agony that he must have felt just seeing Harry Potter every single day at school. And just thinking, in some parallel dimension somewhere, that could have been my son. I could have had that perfect life with Lily, and everything would have worked out fine. I wouldn't have had to have joined the dark side with the Death Eaters and be like a double agent. I wouldn't have had to have dealt with any of this shit. I could have just been content and happy. And it's so sad that he never got that. He is a tragic hero. He is the ultimate hero, I would say, of the entire Harry Potter franchise.
And what makes the line that gets me is when he's after Lee's dead, he says no one can know, and it's when Dumbledore says that you don't want people to know the best of you, and that's such a powerful line because the way you can explore it is tracing back to the McGonagall fight, to Dumbledore's death, to all of it. Everyone hates Snape, and he is the good guy, but he won't allow anyone else to know that he's a good guy. Only Dumbledore ever did, and Dumbledore took that. Every chance Dumbledore says, no, Snape's, I trust Snape. And everyone's like, but why? And ultimately we do find out. But it just gives drama to everything more. When you rewatch it, seeing Snape's memories, you concentrate more. It's got the iconic shot of when Snape's staring at Harry on the table.
Yeah.
I love the way they deal with that, even if it's a few seconds, because it gives that stare so much more levity. Again, that's credit to Alan Rickman, credit to the cinematographer for ever getting that first shot and deciding to include it.
I mean, when you watch it in Philosopher's Stone, you just think, oh, it's classic misdirection because you think that Snape's going to be the ultimate bad guy in that film. Turns out to be Quirrell, but obviously with this scene, it adds so much more resonance to that.
Yeah, and it is the story of a tragic hero. There's so many from Sirius Black, but there is no one like Snape because I don't know if he's a double or a triple agent because he was a Death Eater. And they explain the only reason he did turn to the light was because he found out the prophecy was about Lily, and he just wanted to protect her. And the book goes into a bit more detail on the sort of aspects of the prophecy. Again, that's covered in the previous book, so it wouldn't make sense to go on about in detail here. But Snape essentially overheard the prophecy being done because they just happened, and Dumbledore was in the room, and it was by Trelawney at her job interview. Snape at this point is Death Eater, and he overheard it. You find this at the end of the 6th book. And he ran off to Voldemort, and says there's a prophecy about this. And what Dumbledore says to Harry is that in the 6th book, Snape only heard half of the prophecy. And once he found out the truth, he was... I don't know what he says, but he, this is why he turned good. And Harry's like, well, it's his fault my parents are dead. And that whole angle ties into it, that it is Snape's fault that Lily is dead, because he did tell this to Voldemort. I'm happy they didn't do it in the film. Because what the film does, it's one of the few scenes that the film does better. Not in the whole RC, I'm a book reader, I'm it myself. The way that they finish it with the always line with the doe, it's the perfect time to finish it. The intercutting of him cradling Lily's dead body, whereas in the book it kind of covers past Lily's death. And the always line, you get a bit with George where Snape Sextum Semper, a Death Eater that was about to shoot a killing curse at George. Obviously, it took out his ear. You see a lot of minor bits from the 7th book, but I love where they finish it because it does make the most sense, as well as obviously revealing that Dumbledore did ask him to kill him.
Yeah, and just going back to Dumbledore briefly, because I know obviously we've talked so long on this one scene, but we absolutely needed to. The position shift of like Dumbledore and like the perception of him and Snape. This might be reading too much into it, but the whole aspect of Dumbledore seemingly not to care. And like when Lily's death happens and Snape's just distraught and he's saying like, suck it up, it is what it is. Do you think that Ariana's deaths had that effect on him, where he now has that ability to suppress things and how to just like move on? Because that's happened so many years ago and he's trying to make Snape the same way.
I think it's very different to compare them, but now you've said it, it's something I'm probably going to need loads of time to think about, because it is quite interesting in that degree. Maybe that's something we'll see explored in Fantastic Beasts, because Dumbledore essentially drops his family after Ariana's death, and he takes the fall for it. And there are certainly some comparisons there, but I think the love of not a family member is so different, and it's entirely different to comprehend. But what I love when Dumbledore is talking to him is that, you know, Voldemort will come back, and you're gonna have to be there to like look after him and stuff. And I know it's jumping ahead, but I just absolutely love it when, you know, after all this, don't tell me you've grown to care for the boy. I think that is the powerful moment. Obviously, always does come straight after, so does the doe. But just the way that scene plays out of Dumbledore, it gives such a different opinion of him, that although he does vaguely make out he cares for Harry in the Platform 9 3/4 flashback, you ultimately get the tragedy that the only reason he's protected Harry is because he's got to die at the right moment, and that's what Snape does. And then you can look at that when Snape's telling Dumbledore, when Snape's telling Voldemort before he dies, I will find him. You know that deep down Snape was trying to find him to tell him about the Horcrux, because Dumbledore says Voldemort will be at his weakest when he has to find out he's got to die. And it's just the tragic ending to Harry listening in for the whole time of it. And it ties together the knot of the 8 films of why Harry, you know, can talk to snakes, the stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. And as I said, it's nice revisiting those scenes from the earlier films. We could talk much more about this scene, but we've still got a lot to talk about. So from one tearjerker moment to the next, straight after this scene, after this sudden realisation of Harry, and I always talk about like soundtracks in films, how sometimes where a film will choose not to use a track, I think that lessens the impact of the movie. However, I think that it works in this scene. Like, he's had this realisation, we've had the beautiful music accompaniment in the Pensieve, and the realisation of Snape's ultimate past and the double agent and everything like that. And it's when Harry knows that he has to die, and he walks down the stairs and he sees Ron and Hermione, and they know as well. Like, he says, like, I think you've known too. And then I think Emma Watson just like bursts into tears and just like hugs him. And it's a nice, it doesn't need a soundtrack. You don't need a music for this moment, because you let the actors speak for themselves. You let the emotion come through. And he just looks at Ron, and Ron sort of gives him like an emotional nod, like he understands what needs to happen. And then that leads us to the second most tearjerker moment of the film, I would say, is where Harry has the Resurrection Stone, and he says, I'm ready to die. He's walking to his death to meet Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, and he gets ghostly visions of all of his family and friends. So he gets Lily, there's James, Sirius, Lupin. Have I forgotten anyone else?
Just those four. And for once, it's nice to see Gary Oldman back. I mean, we've talked about Gary Oldman in these films. He's one of the standout characters. Nice getting a little bit more time with Lupin as well, even though he has been in this film. We haven't really seen all that much of him. And it's an interesting thing, because now that Harry has all this knowledge, when he sees his parents, his mum's the first one he goes up to, and he really doesn't talk to James all that much. And I'm wondering if that's because the memories of how James was towards Snape, who is now discovered as a hero, is still fresh in his mind. This is what I spoke about, and in the top 10 we kind of vaguely speak about it, but the reason the scene, I like the scene, but there's the issues is he doesn't speak to James, and that's never explored. It may have something to do with the Snape stuff, but at the end of the day, it's still his father. And the fact that he would speak to Lupin and Sirius but not his dad, I don't know whether that's bad writing, or it was an idea that wasn't thought through, or the idea was so thought through they think people would understand it when they don't. And it's just one of those where it just needed that character moment. But the scene itself is so well done. But before I get into what they say, the Deathly Hallows, at this point, Harry has become the Master of Death. He has all 3. However, for some stupid reason, the film decided to not show him have the invisibility cloak, because at this point he has all 3 united together, and that's what you call the Master of Death. And it's a very odd moment they chose to go to the invisibility cloak, because it would give levity to the Deathly Hallows as a subplot itself, rather than just the Elder Wand being a thing. Gives a bit of the Resurrection Stone its own thing. Ironically, I grew up for years thinking the Resurrection Stone was the Philosopher's Stone, that Dumbledore kept it after all that time, when it really wasn't. Especially when he says he destroyed the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought up that thing about the Deathly Hallows because I did want to talk about that too. And as like a casual fan who hasn't read the books, I do think that the whole subplot of the Deathly Hallows is very muddled in these films, and I slightly get confused about it. I'm not sure why they're ultimately a big deal. In the films, we have like, great, he has the invisibility cloak. What does he do with it? Well, he breaks into a goblin bank briefly with it. What does he do with the resurrection stone? He takes it, he sees visions of his family, and then he drops it to the ground, and he never really uses it. And then the elder wand he gets, and he never really uses it. There's never a moment where he has all three and he has become the Master of Death. There's never that one moment. And I think out of all of the ones, the resurrection stone was always the one that confused me the most, because he uses it to speak to his family, to sort of mentally prepare himself for going to his death straight after, and then he just drops it to the ground. I always thought it was an instrument where if you're holding it, then it will bring you back from the dead. But it is what it says in the story that Emma Watson reads out in the previous film, is that it brings people back to life briefly, that you can talk to them.
Yeah, and I think what explores it is you don't find out about the Master of Death stuff until Dumbledore speaks to him, because they don't explore in the films. But Harry, the invisibility cloak, there's several invisibility cloaks in the series. It's rare to get one, but Harry's one is different. It's undetectable to spells. If you accio it won't come, whereas other ones can. Little minor things like that. And Dumbledore was in possession of it before he died. So at one point Dumbledore has had two Hallows at once. But the point of the Deathly Hallows with Harry is that he never wanted them, and his intention was to never use them for power or greed, which is what plays into the Dumbledore-Ariana subplot. Was his chase of the Deathly Hallows led to the death of his sister, and it's that greed for power, which is why you find out Dumbledore turned down the Minister of Magic several times, because he didn't want that power, he just wanted to be a teacher. And it goes into a massive subplot in the Hallows that Harry was the right person to have the three. He defeated the Hallows by not using them in that bad way. I know that sounds really confusing, but they explain it after Harry's death when he's talking to Dumbledore at the train station. You get a lot of backstory, and it does tie the subplot together, but I think it's something they left out of the films. It made sense to leave them out of the films, but it could have done with just one or two minor little extra moments to give it that levity. But the resurrection stone itself, I like the way the scene plays out. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that the serious line where he's like, "What's it like to die?" And he's just like, quicker than falling asleep.
Yeah.
It's so nasty, and then Lupin's there. And I don't want to sound bad. It feels a bit. I don't really understand why Lupin's there still. I understand Sirius being his godfather, and I know that Lupin's a marauder, which is the main reason he was there. But I feel like the film only chucked him in there so they could finally bring up Teddy.
Yeah, but I also think it's nice because you kind of have James Potter, Sirius, and Lupin all reunited again. I do like that. So isn't Lupin in the book then in this moment?
He is, but it's just one of them where it felt like it was only there to appease James, when in theory it should be there to appease Harry.
Yeah, and again, that whole Teddy line, that if you're a casual fan of the film, you'll be like, who's Teddy? Why should we care about him? If they'd have gone more into that, then I think that moment would have had even more emotional resonance. But it is a scene that does, make me well up a lot. It is a beautifully handled scene. And then we move on to a little bit of comedy with Voldemort. So we finally see Hagrid, who's like tied up. He really doesn't have anything to do in this movie, Hagrid, which is a shame, because Hagrid has always been like a key character in the Harry Potter series, especially in the earlier ones. And it's a shame that he doesn't really get much to do in this last one. But Ralph Fiennes again, in one of his favourite moments where he does the Avada Kedavra spell. Now, he has used it before in these films, and he has said it moderately normal. This is where he puts just so much passion behind this spell. Like, this is the moment he's always waited for, to finally kill Harry Potter. And the way he says it's just like the stupidest way. It's like, Avada Kedavra! And it's such a tonal shift, because it's unintentionally hilarious, and everyone in the audience laughed at that. And then there's another big moment which we'll talk about straight after this, which was just brought the house down. I don't understand his approach to playing Voldemort in this film, because when you have a moment like that where Harry's just met all his dead friends, like family, everything like that, and it's really hard hitting, you're wiping the tears away from your eyes, and then you're crying again, but you're crying through tears of laughter with Voldemort. I guess, is he the comic relief in this film? Is that why they made him like that? It was like, we need some comedy in this film. Let's just pin it all on Ralph Fiennes.
It could be. The fun fact, that Avada Kedavra made it into Lego Dimensions as Voldemort's audio, which is so funny to see in a Lego game. Not just a voice, but that killing curse of all the ones he does.
Oh, and there's the Harry Potter, let's finish this the way we started it, together! And he says it like really weird.
Yeah, it's really bizarre because it feels like they had to record the last word and they couldn't afford Daniel Radcliffe to record the final word. But that's the whole forest scene. Just Hagrid's just sitting there, wasted.
Yeah.
I know it ties into a scene that comes a few scenes later on, but I quite like the Forbidden Forest subplot. I like the fact that they're actually in Aragog's den, although he's dead and they can't really say they're in Aragog's den.
Oh, is that where they are?
Yeah, so it's this cool little, hiding vantage point for them. Bellatrix is doing her thing of laughing and stuff like that. And then ultimately we get the platform 9 3/4 scene.
Yeah, and this. Oh, by the way, I remember seeing this in the sim where the whole film is basically just at night time, and then it immediately cuts to blinding white. Like my eyes
burn.
You don't believe the amount of adjusting that my eyes had to do to this new color palette. It's a very, very weird scene. I remember being slightly confused with it at the time. So we get taken to, I guess Shia LaBeouf has his robot heaven with Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. In this, Harry has his train station heavenly platform, whatever. And then we see weird fetal Voldemort that we saw in Goblet of Fire, which is the one that Wormtail chucked into the cauldron.
Yeah.
And it's weird. I think Dumbledore explains it this is a part of Dumbledore's soul that came here to die. But when Dumbledore asks him where are we, by the way, and Harry says it's a train station, I'm assuming that it looks different to every person that's there, which explains why Voldemort's there. That would look different to him. To Dumbledore, it's probably somewhere else, but it's a place that has some kind of resonance and importance to the character, and that's why for Harry it's platform 9 3/4.
Yeah, I assume so. It's a weird one because obviously I'm finishing it, but it's a dream, so I can understand why Harry picked it because he's not going to pick a cupboard under the stairs.
No,
he's not going to pick Hogwarts. I understand why he would, but it would be a bit boring to pick Hogwarts. But it was kind of cool to see it be King's Cross. Dead baby Voldemort, everyone laughed at.
Yeah. And it's done with a puppet as well, which I really appreciate. This thing looks gross, it's skins all melting onto the floor underneath it. It's fucking horrible. Yeah,
and they kind of explain that that's the part of Voldemort that's had a Harry that's now dead because he was a Horcrux. This is where you have the most sort of backstory of the whole film, where Dumbledore's telling him, you've come so far, you're a Horcrux. They don't really explain it in the film, that to let Dumbledore off the hook so slightly. He kind of says, I wondered if you would basically survive being a Horcrux, but I didn't know myself. Whereas in the film they don't mention that at all, because I don't know why, but it makes it makes Dumbledore come across more of a nasty bloke after the pig for slaughter line. Yeah,
you're right. I never even thought about that. He just kind of, he seems like he's okay with him, isn't it? The news has meant nothing to him.
Yeah, and it's just an odd scene, but it's just there to bring Harry back into the world, and you kind of have that line where it's just because you're dreaming, it doesn't mean it's not real.
I love that. That's probably one of my favourite lines in the film, and I don't know if that's directly left from in the book or not, but it feels like something that J.K. Rowling would write, because it kind of ultimately sums up the world she's created herself with these Harry Potter books. When he says is all this real, or is it all in my head? And it's of course it's all in your head, but why should that not make it real? Seems very much like something J.K. Rowling would write to sort of encapsulate her wizarding, the world she's created with as a wizarding world.
Yeah, and it's just it's such a Dumbledore line as well.
Yeah.
And I kind of like the fact that he's got an outright cameo in this bit. It makes sense for him to kind of come here to get the truth. They don't go into the Ariana stuff because Dumbledore explained it thoroughly. Again, it makes sense to not go into it because it would take the emotion away of it being Harry meant to be dead. It would add a bit more screen time on, which I don't think people needed at this point.
Mm.
But ultimately, this scene is a clever way of keeping Harry alive.
Yeah, there was also another weird bit in this scene that I wanted to talk about, which, as a casual fan, like, I thought it was maybe a little subtle hint that to the parentage of Harry Potter. It's really weird because Harry, before Dumbledore leaves, he says that Snape's Patronus was a doe, same as, Lily's. It's curious, don't you think? And then Dumbledore says, actually, now I think of it, it's not curious at all. Now, watching that, I thought, are they sort of like subtly hinting that Snape might be Harry's dad? Because why would he question why the Patronus is the same? Because he's just had the flashbacks where he knows that Snape loved Lily. So it's very obvious why he would have the same Patronus.
The truth is that a doe is attracted to a stag, therefore Harry and Snape should have been a thing, because that is Harry's Patronus.
Oh god, that's
very
weird.
dark.
That's weird.
No, again, I'm gonna say in the books. In the fifth one, when they're building up Tonks' relationship, not with Lupin, sorry, the sixth one, they think she had a thing for Sirius, that she feels responsible for his death, because her Patronus changes to a four-legged animal, which they later reveal to be a werewolf.
Yeah.
Through that, you find out that your Patronus can change based on love, and Snape's became a doe. I don't think it was always a doe, but it certainly became one. So again, that's something they couldn't really explore in the film properly, and it's just sort of a mark for Harry to think, why did Snape love your mother?
Yeah. Yeah, and then Dumbledore the White just like evaporates out the scene. We're back to pure darkness. The eyes have a time to adjust. We get another great Voldemort line where Helen Bonham Carter tries to help him. He's like, "I don't need your help," and he just like pushes her to the ground. Which I guess she's just given birth, right? If we're that whole cursed child thing. Very, very weird. But Voldemort has finally killed Harry Potter. He gets Narcissa Malfoy to check on the body. And this is actually a really, really nice character development for the character of Narcissa, where, she's witnessed all this destruction. She realises that they've all gone way too far with what's happened. And she's just concerned for Draco, like her son. Like, she wants to know he's okay. And then Harry, like, gives a little nod. And she covers for him and says, like, yeah, you have killed him. What then follows is a great bit of... Oh, sorry, was there a bit...
Before, I just want to save Narcissa.
Yes, go on, sorry.
It's the whole recycle from the first film that through the power of love, Harry survives.
Yeah.
And it's the concept that Voldemort doesn't understand love. If any of the Death Eater, they would have said it was, dead. But because he picked Narcissa to do it, it just shows Voldemort's weakness again, that he doesn't get the concept.
And that's always been a constant with the character of Narcissa as well, from her first appearance in Half-Blood Prince, where her one concern is for the well-being of Draco and how she gets Snape to watch over him and protect him. It's nice to see her sort of put her trust in Harry in this moment as well, because the two haven't really had any interaction before this, I don't think. So we get the scene where, Voldemort has killed Harry Potter, and now it's his job to go back to Hogwarts and display his dead body to the rest of the students there. And it's a great build-up. I love the soundtrack in this. It's almost like a funeral march. We get Voldemort using Force Push to move like a dead giant off the causeway as they're walking through. But this scene brought the goddamn house down in the cinema. It's a tense scene. It's meant to be a scene where like everyone's mourning Harry Potter. He's not going to be dead, but you're meant to be in that moment with all the characters there. Ralph Fiennes, I'd love to sit this man down in an interview and just ask him what the hell was he thinking. I'm not complaining because it's great. I love it. But it's probably... I don't know if it is. It's probably the most parodied Voldemort moment on the internet.
There are several Voldemort moments, and the majority of them happen in this single scene. I just love the way he just tosses the giant out of his path.
Yeah, it's great.
It's just, get out my way. Hagrid carrying Harry, just crying again. A brilliant throwback to Harry carrying Harry as a... What? Hagrid carrying Harry as a baby to the Dursleys. He takes him out of the wizarding world, and he's the one that brings him back into it after they think he's died. So J.K. Rowling says that was one of the first scenes she actually encompassed for the final one, which why she says Hagrid was the Warren character she knows she'd never kill, because she had that one moment from the beginning, which is kind of cool. But Voldemort in this, it's the Draco hug,
which apparently was improvised. Like, I read this literally on IMDb before we hit record. I did not realise that was improvised, but that makes it even more hilarious.
It is. It's because Draco, we cover it in our top 10 moments. Draco picks his side. He chooses to stay with the Hogwarts people, and he won't budge. Not only until they really start to hamper him to come over.
Yeah, even when his dad's calling him over, he doesn't move. It's only when his mum calls him over.
Exactly. And it's this great sort of character moment where he's, after all this time, he's still in this black suit. He's picked Hogwarts, and there's been signs of it throughout the films. In the previous one, he wouldn't sort of admit Harry to being dead. He wouldn't follow through with killing Dumbledore. And ultimately, he does pick his side right here, right now. And he does go back over, but essentially that's probably because his crazy auntie's there and their boss, who's probably going to kill him if he doesn't come. And it's just his reaction to the hug, like, he just stops dead. He does not have a clue what's happening.
It's like, and he really drags out the hug as well. Like, he hugs him and then he like squeezes him a little bit. It's so awkward, but it's great. And going back to Draco, I'm again probably reading way too much into this, because you talked about that you thought that was some bad writing about how Harry didn't immediately go to his dad and he didn't really talk to him. You kind of get a vague parallel with that with Draco, how he only goes to his mum when she calls him. And it's the moment, I don't know, I think it's when everyone's fleeing, where it might be in this moment actually, where Lucius goes to like, you know, shake his hand or like touch him on the shoulder, and Narcissa just kind of like quickly carries him away and walks off. And it's this moment of like utter defeat and just like ridicule on Lucius's face.
Yeah, poor Lucius. He's grown a beard. He's got a son that doesn't appreciate everything he's done for him in his life, and now his wife's turning on him too.
Yeah, but I want to see like a spin-off with this. I want to see what happened when they get back to the Malfoy Manor.
Wow, they didn't get done. They're the only Death Eaters that were let off because Narcissa saved Harry Potter's life. Spoiler alert.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very cool. And obviously, there's 19 years later with Scorpius Malfoy being a part of the Cursed Child, which is the most sinister name you can think of.
That's a great name. You know that Lucius is sleeping on the couch that night when they get back, like probably for like a good few weeks actually. But no, the Voldemort, the whole thing, it's great. It's because it's the joy on his face again. He has achieved what he wanted to in life. He has beaten Harry Potter back. Now, jumping forward a little bit, so when Harry Potter initially wakes up, this is the scene I wanted to talk about with Draco, and I will never forgive Warner Brothers for cutting this out, and I only found this out fairly recently actually. There was a great bit of character development for Draco's character here. Now, you think his character arc's complete where he picks his side. When Harry Potter initially wakes up, there's a moment that was cut from the film. It's not even in any of the deleted scenes. It was filmed, though, where Draco rushes to Harry and hands him his wand and says, "Here you go, Potter." And that's the wand that Harry has when he beats Voldemort.
Yeah. See, I think it's a great scene. However, we never see Harry lose his wand.
No, but like if you're thinking about it, you would think that Voldemort would disarm him anyway. Like, he would take away the wand. Because
it was Malfoy's wand, which would make sense. But
I just think like it finishes Malfoy's story arc. He's been this bully, this horrible character that's been, well, in the later films, trying to kill Harry Potter, and then in the last moments when he comes back to life, he gives him his wand and he says, "Here you go, Potter." In that one line finishes his entire story arc over 8 movies, and I have no idea why Warner Brothers cut it.
Yeah, it was a great scene. Well, it would have been, but I just think because they don't show him lose the wand, they would never show it suddenly being Malfoy's possession again.
Yeah.
Whether that's why, but then again, why didn't they think that through?
Yeah, exactly.
But it would have been a great moment. And unfortunately, we don't see it, but Malfoy kind of gets his nod of approval at the end in 19 years later.
Yeah, sporting a great moustache and beard combo. Like, he's definitely followed in the footsteps of his father from the former years in Chamber of Secrets, where he's just suave, he's suited and booted. I can't remember if he's got a cane as well.
I hope so.
I think he might have in the 19 years, I can't remember. We get on to another negative I have in this film. So I talked about the whole lack of sort of seeing the side characters in the battles. My other probably biggest criticism I have of this film is the final fight with Voldemort himself. You want it to be great, you want it to be epic. This is the ultimate protagonist against the ultimate antagonist, and really the fight isn't anything to write home about. There's like a little bit of, you know, spell casting here and there. I think Voldemort brings the roof down on him in one scene, and then he does like this weird sort of like Japanese anime tentacle porn thing where like all the silk from his robe starts tying Harry Potter up, and it's a spell we haven't seen before. It just looks weird. And even when they have their like final spell casting thing in the courtyard, it really is just back to what was established in Goblet of Fire, where it's just a single beam and it's almost like a lightsaber lock, and that's it. That's our fight with Voldemort, and it's just really underwhelming. Like, I think it really differs in the book, doesn't it, even in terms of the location?
The book has a far superior ending to the battle. The whole thing takes place in the Great Hall of this part 2 of the whole Harry Voldemort. What happens is Harry's hiding the invisibility cloak. I understand why they got rid of that. No one really knows where Harry's gone. You get Bellatrix's death, which they keep the exact same, except you just hear about Bellatrix dying. She's the last Death Eater standing. It's like Flitwick took out Dolohov, X took out Y, and then it's Bellatrix and Voldemort are the only two ones left. Bellatrix dies, Voldemort screams no, and then Harry reveals himself, and there's this confrontation of more words where, you know, Harry explains to Tom Riddle that through love, he goes on about the love stuff, that Snape loved my mother Lily, you don't understand the concept of love, blah blah blah. And Harry goes, I've got the Elder Wand. He explains how Harry has it, and well, Harry has the power of it, but obviously Voldemort has the Elder Wand.
Yeah.
And what the book does so much better is Voldemort hits the killing curse and it repels onto him. They do the whole Expelliarmus killing curse thing, but it rebounds straight away. It doesn't have the stupid lightsaber duel that we've seen so many times before. It repels and kills Voldemort. He doesn't turn into paper mache. He just, his body just drops dead on the floor, which I think would have left far more of an impact.
See, I can understand why the movie wants to drag it out a little bit. Like, I do. Like, it's the end fight. Like, I like the whole scene where it is a bit strange, where Voldemort turns into that weird black mist thing and he's like slamming him into turrets, and there's like a weird horrific CGI moment where their heads get blended into one. But I like the scene where they're both flung apart in the courtyard, and it's the cut in between the two where they're both trying to desperately crawl across the ground and get their wands. Like, I love that stuff. That's great. But in terms of the actual spell casting, you almost want something as fast-paced as the ending to Order of the Phoenix, like that battle that we see with Dumbledore. You want something like that. And although the beam of light stuff looks great, like in a trailer and everything like that, it doesn't make for an entertaining watch, because you are just kind of sitting there watching two people stand still, just holding wands out in front of them.
Yeah, and it doesn't really deserve that ending. I mean, the fact that no one's around it, just having people in the Great Hall, even for a duel, would have been awesome.
Yeah. Because
everyone's standing back just stunned because they're going to let them duel. Whereas the problem with this, the courtyard's empty. It doesn't feel as much of a gravitas as it should do. No.
And if I'm going to compare it back to The Hobbit again, like, I hate doing this, but just so many parallels between the two fantasy series. The confrontation with, like, Azog, the Pale Orc, in An Unexpected Journey, all the company are present. You know, you've got the fire on the log with Thorin, and it's like, it feels like a big ending duel, and it's awesome and it's epic. And then when you get to Battle of the Five Armies and they have the same duel, it's just not as much of an impact, because it's just the two of them on a little sheet of ice with no one present to witness it, so you don't get that dramatic impact. And actually thinking about it now, yeah, maybe the ending of Harry Potter would have been better if you've got all the students watching this happen. Definitely in the Great Hall as well. I can imagine in that now, that would have looked fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that, could you imagine Ralph Fiennes to have witnessed Bellatrix die, like, near him?
Yeah.
That's his last and most loyal Death Eater dead. Just him on his own. And
it's the mother of his child as well, apparently.
Yeah.
Thanks, cursed child.
He's gone orphan now. And, you know, he's still talking the talk to Potter, and he doesn't accept that the Elder Wand isn't his, which is what leads to it. He doesn't believe Harry. He doesn't believe Harry about Snape either, and all this, that, and the other. It's a great talk moment. I understand they want a cinematic climax to it. But again, they could have had that little wandy duel in the Great Hall. They could have had people watching. It just would have given a bit more emphasis to the ending. Whereas it's just, oh, he's obliterated. Someone must have come out and gone, hey, where's Voldemort gone? Yeah.
And you mentioned Bellatrix, and I don't want to talk about this loads because I know you've already talked about it in your top 10 countdown, but it's a great moment for Molly Weasley. Bit of a strange spell. I know in the book she just uses a straight up Avada Kedavra. They probably thought that was a bit too hard hitting, a bit too villainous for Molly to use that, even despite everything that she's gone through. But it is kind of a satisfying moment. It does kind of nerf down the power of Bellatrix, though, where she's just kind of, getting beaten by Molly. But you could argue that it's like she's channeling the rage, she's given into the dark side, and she's trying to get rid of this character that's just caused so much death and destruction and threatened her family. It's a cool moment. I know that it's Julie Walters' favourite moment of Molly Weasley in the film, saying that line, not get away from her, you bitch. That's from Aliens. Not my daughter, you bitch. It's a great character moment. It's a little bit of an anticlimax for how Helena Bonham Carter goes out the film, but you saw it coming, and I guess it's justified that Molly's the one that carries it out.
Yeah, and originally J.K. Rowling had plans for Neville to do it, avenging his parents after all that.
Yeah.
But I prefer, it wouldn't suit Neville killing her.
No, it's much cooler when he kills the snake, Nagini, with a sweet uppercut with Godric Gryffindor's sword, and also the fact that the sword presents itself to him as well as a true Gryffindor. It's really nice.
Yeah, and I don't think not in a nasty way, no one should have got 2 kills, if that makes sense. The way they did it was that every Horcrux is killed by someone else.
Does he kill Nagini in the book as well, then? Yeah,
he does the sword on Nagini, and Molly does Bellatrix, which is the whole power of a mother's love thing again. A grieving mother, but obviously she's trying to protect her daughter Ginny.
Yeah, so Voldemort evaporates in what was probably one of the most satisfying 3D moments in film history. As I said, I only saw this in 2D, but I can imagine that looked pretty nice. Then we ultimately get the reconciliation afterwards. The equilibrium is kind of re-established. Filch has just got to, put in that work. He's got to get the sweeping on. He's got to pick all the rubble up. Maybe they can use a spell to just reconstruct everything, because we've seen that in the Harry Potter films before. It's a nice moment. I think it would have been nice to sort of like bring back some of the old John Williams music when order's been re-established, but everyone is just kind of in stunned silence as to what's happened. And we get to see some cameos as well. We see Trelawney again, we see Sprout, we see Slughorn, we even see Cho Chang again, and there's a nice moment where she kind of smiles at Harry. But the Filch moment just brings it, and you need that moment of levity. You need that joke to sort of like bring the levity back and the calm tone that needs to be established after everything that's come before. We also get a nice parting hug with Hagrid. I think it would have been more emotionally impactful if we'd had more Hagrid moments in this film. Maybe if he'd have had some dialogue with Harry. I'm not exactly sure where they would have fit that in. But it's a nice to have that moment with Hagrid again, because he was the one who brought him into the wizarding world, not only as a baby but also when he took him to Diagon Alley and things like that. So it's nice to have that last bonding moment with his character. And then we get to a scene which in our plan you've listed as Destruction of the Elder Wand brackets bullshit. Go for it.
Yeah, so I'm going to say it once more in the book. Potentially the last time I say it. Wow,
maybe.
Sad times. Harry's wand is destroyed in part 1. We're very aware of that. Wands can't be repaired, however the Elder Wand is the most powerful wand in the history. When Harry gets the Elder Wand, all he asks for is, he gets Hermione and says, give me my wand back. And he does repair her and it fixes the wand. Yeah. And he then says, I'm going to put the Elder Wand back in Dumbledore's grave. When I die, no one would have defeated me, therefore the power of the Elder Wand relinquishes. Which is, an interesting habit. In the film, it's just snap. Oh, okay. It's just bullshit.
I would never do that. I'm sorry, I would keep the hell out of that Elder Wand.
But the fact that why don't they just do repair on his old wand? You don't. Then he can. And
because that was established in part 1, that would have tied that up nicely as well.
Exactly, and it's just there like, oh, what are you gonna do for one now, mate? Can't steal Malfoy's, that's gone.
That's a great point. I didn't even think of that. I guess he's got to go back to Ollivander's, right? Probably get some kind of discount on it because he saved his life.
Yeah, but again, it's one of them things. I understand snapping the older one, but just repair the old one. It's just 5 seconds of fan service, and it is a bit stupid. And I get this is me griping on minor things, but it's the whole connection of that was Harry's wand. It stayed with him. He's devastated after it's destroyed, whereas in this, it's just like, we've moved on.
I guess you could argue that if you put it back in the coffin, like, what's to stop a new dark wizard rising up and taking the wand again and causing all this destruction again? And I suppose the theme's the same, that Harry doesn't want the power of the wand. He wants to be rid of it, so they just do it in like a really quick way where he snaps it. It would have been nice to have seen him repair his wand, get a shot of the old wand. I'm not a massive fan of the design of Harry's original wand, to be honest, but I guess it is iconic to the series and iconic to that character. And it would have been nice to have sort of go back to Dumbledore's grave, like he's met him in the afterlife, and then he goes back to his physical body, and he gives the wand back. That would have been nice. You could have had a nice sort of like parallel shot of where Voldemort tore the lid off the tomb and took the wand. You could have Harry putting the wand back in and closing it. That would have been nice. See, I haven't read the book, so I don't have that attachment to it, but I can see why people would be annoyed about that. To me, it's exactly the same sort of like lesson that's taken away from it, that Harry doesn't want that power. But I mean, I wouldn't have snapped the wand. I never even thought about that now Harry doesn't have a wand, but that's hilarious now every time I'm going to rewatch that. And then we get a nice shot where after that the three of them just kind of stand on the causeway in front of Hogwarts. The music's really nice, and we get sort of like, you know, a long shot of them, all three in camera, and it fades to black. And I guess you could argue that would have been a nice ending shot in its own, but it follows the book with this, and we get a 19 years later flash forward, which I'm still really torn on if I like it. And I think it's because obviously they use all the same actors who do not look 19 years later at all. I think they do a fair job with their attempt with Daniel Radcliffe. I think he probably looks the most convincing out of all of them, but and maybe Malfoy as well with his sweet beard, but everyone else just looks ridiculous, like Ginny and Hermione and Ron. Ron's in a fat suit now. But then on the flip side, I do like it because it brings it full circle, and it's like, you know, the circle of life moment where now they're going to have their adventures at Hogwarts, and we do get the reprise of Leaving Hogwarts, John Williams' track from the ending of the soundtrack to Philosopher's Stone, which I love. It was used in Philosopher's Stone. There was a variation on it with Reunion of Friends in the Chamber of Secrets soundtrack. And I remember before going to see the film, because I'm a huge proponent of film soundtracks and continuation with musics that have been established for moments and characters and leitmotifs, things like that. When the ending was coming on, I remember going, if they don't make use of John Williams' ending music, I wanted them to use Reunion of Friends because that's my favourite track. I was like, if they don't use some variation on this track, I'm going to walk out now because that's a huge missed opportunity. And then the first few bars of it chimed up in the cinema, and I just like sort of sat back in my chair and I relaxed, and I was like, okay, they've done this ending justice now. They've done the final shot of Harry Potter justice.
Yeah, and the whole 19 years later scene, it deserves it. I know that sounds really odd, but the way it finishes just abruptly, now what of them outside Hogwarts, it doesn't deserve it. And 19 years later, it works, and they do a good job on some of the characters. It's interesting they're passing on the generations. He picked 3 absolutely horrific, selfish names for his children as well: James Potter, Lily Potter, and Albus Severus Potter. Ginny had a brother-in-law that died. No, sorry, Harry had a brother-in-law that died at the Battle of Hogwarts. His wife's brother died. Oh no, don't worry, lads, I'm going to name after 2 of my head teachers instead. Oh, okay. Are you also going to name after your mum and dad? Yeah. Oh, okay.
I never even thought of that.
Your daughter's middle name's Luna. Wife named after Luna's good. Yeah. And then it's just his son.
Thanks, JK.
It's his son. Everyone took the piss when they first saw it because he looked like Justin Bieber. Because at the time, Justin Bieber was that child thing. And I like the 1980 concepts. Why can't I be in Slytherin? It's like, you're 2 of the greatest people ever in Slytherin. Don't worry about it. You can ask it if you don't want to go in. Oh, okay. Nice ending. Now we know that he did end up in Slytherin, so the joke's on him.
Oh, he does end up in Slytherin?
Yeah. Sorry,
that's hilarious. Ruin that ending for me now.
It becomes BFF with Scorpius. Scorpius Malfoy, one of the best names ever come across in a fictional property. I'm not going to go into details on Cursed Child too much, but I kind of wrote it down because Warner Bros. Have registered the trademark for it. There have been rumours.
We will get the film of it.
We will. I think we'll get an extremely modified version of the film in which J.K. Rowling has written. I'm not going to go into specific events, although we keep dropping one spoiler. I'm not going into specific details on what happens. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that J.K. Rowling did not necessarily rewrite it, but there are some aspects to it which will be very, very hard to shoot in 19 years' time. Well, technically be 2030, because that's 19 years after the last film came out.
And I mean, I know I'm a slow reader, so by the time I eventually get to Cursed Child, it probably will be the release of that movie. But it'd be interesting to... I know we talk about movies and stuff, but if I eventually get to the book and read it, it'd be quite nice to jump on and sort of have a discussion about that and how they could make it into a film and what they could change about it. Because I know it's very much a time travel movie, and you know, with certain actors that have passed away, or by the time they get to the movie, sadly, actors that will probably have passed away. I don't know how they're going to do it, and you're right, it probably will have to be modified. But in terms of the 19 years later, it's a nice final shot. It's nice to go back to platform 9 3/4 and see that train again. It's a really nice ending shot, and the credits music as well. It's Harry's Wondrous World, I believe, or at least a segment of it. Really nice going back to those themes, and I'm so glad they did, because I know that John Williams did request to come back. I don't know if it was for the final 2 movies or at least just for this final one, but again, he's a busy man. He has many scores to do, and his schedule again for this film was just... it was too busy for that year. So I guess that's it, really, isn't it? Have we gone through everything in the films themselves? I know we're going to do like a little outro now. Wow, we've almost gone on for the length of the movie itself, which is incredible. The shortest Harry Potter movie, and we've gone on the longest. So we've teased this throughout all the other ones where we said we were going to rank the Harry Potter movies. Now, I know it's a very difficult thing to do, and if you're like me, George, your list constantly alternates all the time depending on your mood and which ones you've seen most recently. I did a week-long marathon of these where I watched one each of the days, so they're still very fresh in my mind. But I mean, ask me tomorrow, the same question, my list is probably going to be different. But now we're going to rank the Harry Potter films. So if we go in order back and forth, and if we go from our least favourite to our favourite, we'll just go through this really quickly. I just thought this would be a nice little thing to end Harry Potter month on.
And I want to say the least favourite is the film I thoroughly enjoy.
Oh yeah. I don't hate any of these films by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, there's got to be an unofficial least favourite on the list somewhere. So George, what is your least quote unquote least favourite Harry Potter film?
Goblet of Fire.
Yeah, that's mine too. We discussed that. I don't want to sort of like ramble on about each of these, but it's not a bad film, as we said, by any stretch of the imagination, but something just feels slightly off in it, and I think it's because they just couldn't include everything they perhaps could have.
Yeah, and dodgy haircuts, and no Quidditch World Cup too.
Yeah.
Next one, Philosopher's Stone. That sounds so nasty to have it so far down.
God, our list is so different. Our list is so different with that.
But again, it's all these films are films I love. It's like there are thin lines that separate seventh from first.
My seventh, you are not going to like. It's Prisoner of Azkaban.
I kind of expected that.
It feels like a soft reboot. It's not the Hogwarts I remember and loved from the first two. It's, character redesigns, things like that. It just rubs me up the wrong way every time I watch it. There are some beautiful scenes. Gary Oldman's introduction's fantastic. Lupin, love it. Love all that dialogue scene. Everything's great. But it's just kind of like a really awkward feel every time I watch it. Like, it feels like I'm not watching Harry Potter. So that's why I had to put it at 7.
In 6th place, Chamber of Secrets.
Oh my god, you're killing me with the old ones.
Gilderoy and Lucius took that from a 7th to 6th.
Yeah.
Almost 5th, but they didn't make that, unfortunately, my friends.
My 6 is Half-Blood Prince. Film that's had a very, very troubled sort of watching history in my line of watching films. Hated it the first time I watched it, rewatched it a couple of weeks ago and had like a sort of newfound love for it. It was almost like rediscovering a new Harry Potter film. Was nowhere near as bad as I remembered it, but in a lot of sort of the threads that link into the last one with the whole relationship things. Slughorn's great, the ending with Dumbledore's really tragic and just a beautifully put together scene, so that is my number 6 pick.
My 5th pick is Deathly Hallows Part 1.
Right.
I really enjoy it. I just don't enjoy it more than the ones above it.
Yeah. I think that's both of us, really. It's really difficult to order these. My 5th is Order of the Phoenix. It's a great film. I love the stuff where they take the characters. We get some nice insight into Snape, for example. The Room of Requirement and Umbridge is great. However, I think the ending with the prophecy, for me at least, I know you've read the book, it does get a little bit muddled and it's somewhat anticlimactic, but it does pick itself up with the duel and the whole possession scene after it. Yeah.
I'm trying to go into detail because I haven't listed it yet. My 4th is Half-Blood Prince.
Right.
It's certainly a film that I've enjoyed more as I've matured with age. I love what they do with Dumbledore's death. I love the Horcrux introduction of that, the backstory of Voldemort. And I kind of enjoyed it, even though it includes the weird Ginny thing.
Yeah, no, I think we're both in agreement the whole Ginny thing's kind of wasted in these movies. My number 4 pick is Deathly Hallows Part 1. The sad truth of it is, I adore that movie, and deciding whether I preferred Part 1 to Part 2 was really tough. I think that where they take the characters is better in Part 1, but I think I like Part 2 as a movie slightly more overall. I think Snape saves that for me. There had to be one at number 4, and it just had to be Deathly Hallows Part 1, although I do love that movie.
My third is Order of the Phoenix. I absolutely love it. I love the final third's amazing. Umbridge is just incredible. I love the Ministry of Magic. I love what happened to Arthur Weasley. I love the sense of law. It could have got higher, but there's no Gilderoy.
Yeah, that's a big markdown for me. God, I wish he'd have been in that movie. My 3 pick is Deathly Hallows Part 2. As I said, it was really neck and neck with Part 1. Difficult making a decision between those. But now you know which ones are in my top 2.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, your number 2 pick.
Number 2 is Deathly Hallows Part 2.
Yep.
That and the one I picked for number 1 are the two standouts which fly above the rest. It's the perfect finale for a franchise.
Mm.
And
oh god, sorry.
I was just saying, and Snape.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And my number 2, which one am I going to pick now? This has actually changed over the years. After rewatching these movies, I've had to rethink my list a bit. So my number 2 is Chamber of Secrets. It's a film I love. It was my favourite for a long time. However, after rewatching them, although it has Gilderoy, who's my favourite character, although it has Lucius, who's like probably my second favourite character in the franchise, there was one above it when I rewatched them again. It's probably nostalgia goggles on me, but Chamber of Secrets is my number 2.
And that leaves both our number 1s if you can do simple maths.
Yeah.
Mine is Prisoner of Azkaban. I absolutely love it. I love what they do with the Hogwarts world. I know this differs to yours so much. I love the introduction of Sirius Black, the whole subplot of the classic he's not the bad guy after all, the introduction of the Marauders, the little bits of Hogsmeade, but in general it starts to get a bit darker and you have a brilliant finale.
Mm-hmm. And again, simple maths, my number 1 is Philosopher's Stone. It's interesting how both of our 7 picks were each other's number 1 picks. But Philosopher's Stone, when I rewatched it again, yes, the kid acting is very cringy, it's very cutesy, they're very, very bad actors at the time that matured over the course of the films. But it is the first one. It introduces you into this world. It's one of the best films of world building I've ever seen. Watching it again, just the music with John Williams, the acting with like Richard Harris as Dumbledore, the location and the look and the feel of Hogwarts and Diagon Alley and everything that goes along with it. It feels like the most complete movie, even up until the ending. And you know they're going to come back for all the sequels, but you can watch Philosopher's Stone on its own. It will be its own entity. And I just had an absolute emotional blast just watching that film again, watching all these movies again. As we said, it's very difficult to order these movies because none of them are bad by any stretch of the imagination. They're all great in their own way and they all have key scenes that are important, but I don't know. I mean, as I said, ask me again like tomorrow or next week, this list will probably change, but that's how we'd rank the Harry Potter films. And to round out, really, we did this with our Star Wars month last year. This is the scene where we get really, really soppy and we talk about Harry Potter in one fitting conclusion. So we're going to talk about the overall impact of Harry Potter and why it means so much to us. I think although our sort of entries into the Harry Potter world are probably very, very different, and especially sort of like over the course of the years, I know it's certainly been different for me. I think it's pretty much on the same level why we love Harry Potter. But George, what is it about Harry Potter that means so much to you?
I genuinely don't know. That's the anticlimax.
You just feel it.
It's an odd one. It's something that I used to look forward to. It was an event every time a film came out. I grew up with it. It was just one of those things where I don't think anything can compare to it for what it did across an era of my lifetime, mainly my childhood.
Mm.
And it's, as now in my adulthood, it's come back into it. There's a lot of maturity involved with it, and it's just fun. It's nice. I've got people that are into it, so it's one of them that I can chat about. There's plenty of memes, and it is making a gladful return. But I don't know, it's not like Star Wars. Star Wars, I could talk about meaning forever. It got me into film, blah, 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 this, that, the other. But Harry Potter was always the number 2 to Star Wars, so it was just a massive part of my childhood and future self.
And I think for me, what I liked about it is that over the years, you can tie it to your own life, your own school life. I mean, this came out when I was at school, and you very much connected with all the characters in their situation. And you're absolutely right with me, like with growing up, it was always like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings as well, sort of came in around the same time as this. But with Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, which are very, very sort of like high fantasy, you can even argue Star Wars is fantasy as well, sci-fi fantasy. Harry Potter felt the most attainable somehow, because there are many real world elements to it. And you could imagine, like, you could believe, like, one day you would get your letter to Hogwarts. One day you would get to ride a Nimbus 2000 and see Hogwarts for yourself. And I think that aspect of, like, the whole schooling thing really does work. It's almost like the Toy Story thing, how, you know, I was lucky to be the same age as the character of Andy. So when all the sequels came out, I had that connection to it. And I kind of had the same with Harry Potter as well. When he got angsty, I got angsty and broke away from the series, and then when it was the emotional conclusion to it, that's when I came back to it. So it was a very weird relationship I had with the Harry Potter series. But, you know, with Fantastic Beasts, it definitely has got me into the series now, to the point where I will jump on and do 8 reviews of all the films, which I wouldn't have probably done in the other few years. And regardless of what I thought of Fantastic Beasts, it is nice that it's back, and it is nice to see the franchise evolve and change and come back. You know, we've got the Play Out, which you've got tickets for. There's more books coming out, probably more movies coming out after Fantastic Beasts, maybe The Cursed Child. So it's interesting. It's nice to see that now Harry Potter fans have something to look forward to in the future, like us as Star Wars fans have now, with probably a movie coming out for the rest of our lives. It's nice to see that Harry Potter's getting that treatment too. So I guess that's what Harry Potter means to me. It's also a big part of my childhood, like the merchandise, and like it's a big aspect of my childhood. So although it's not as huge as my love for Star Wars, for example, or indeed Lord of the Rings, it is still a big part of my childhood history. So that's why I still have that connection to the series. So that was our very soppy conclusion to Harry Potter month and our review on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. So thank you for listening. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of this movie, any of the previous Harry Potter movies, and let us know what Harry Potter means to you. In terms of the Harry Potter month and the rest of the videos that are coming up on the channel, we are not quite done with Harry Potter. We have one more video coming out other than our review on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, which should be up on the channel by the time this goes up. On Tuesday evening, 9 PM UK time, we'll have US times up on our Twitter and Facebook. We will be going live for a special brand new episode of Battle of the Brackets. It's been a long time since we did our last one, and on this episode we will be battling out for who is the best Harry Potter character. If you go on our Facebook and Twitter, you'll see the picture up of all the people that we're going to be arguing throughout each of the brackets, so please get commenting who you want to see as your favourite one. Is the one we missed out? Please tune in for that. That'll be a great fun. And then moving forwards, there'll be more reaction videos from me, more movie reviews, and next month we're shifting from Harry Potter to Star Wars. We're doing Star Wars month. Last year we did reviews of all the films, so we won't be redoing those again, obviously, but we'll have brand new Star Wars videos, new discussion videos, new Battle of the Brackets, top 10 lists, all that good stuff. So please do hit that subscribe button. Best way to keep updated with all of our content. And yeah, thank you for joining us for Harry Potter month, and until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.
Mischief managed.